With this latest chapter of My Hero Academia, we would have the quirk awakening of Shinso, DABI would face his family, and All Might's plan for victory would begin to move. To begin the last one, it would be brought to our attention that All For One cannot be lied to, or rather he can be, but he'll be aware of any sort of malicious intent, no matter how faint. A quirk which he stole during the very beginning of the quirk era from an ancestor of Detective Tsukauchi. He couldn't exactly recall the original name of the quirk, but it was one that had been further augmented and improved by way of the many other quirks within him, which is why he felt so confident when it came to receiving information from his followers. So much so that when speaking to Oyama's parents about their son delivering DEKU to him, he felt very satisfied in knowing that they meant him no harm, which he'd only further corroborate with a phone call to Yuga himself later on, which was the very same case. From there, DEKU would meet with Oyama in an abandoned parking lot, as apparently he'd been released thanks to his parents' lawyer. DEKU was pretty enthusiastic and was ready to let everyone else know, but Oyama would stop him as he wanted to talk beforehand. From there, Oyama would provide DEKU with a bit of insight into All For One's mentality and true aspirations. With the current situation Japan had been forced into, there came a major crash to the value of the Japanese yen, which by extension caused the overwhelming majority of Japanese corporations into bankruptcy. This, on top of coordinated villain attacks, caused the damage to spread across the world. At this rate, the world would be facing a Great Depression, or something akin to the period around the initial advent of quirks. We'd be looking at record unemployment and a loss in the faith of currencies. The Japanese government would lack the strength to establish long-term policies and stand on its own 2 feet as other countries prioritize their own situations, from which point the world would be in the palm of All For One's hands. If the country were to lack drinkable water, electricity, gas, or even power, these were all things that he as an individual would be able to provide. DEKU would refute such a reality, saying that the world would never go along with such a thing, something I think is a very optimistic outlook, but perhaps not all too realistic. If things came down to it, I think there would most definitely be a resistance force, but in the grand scheme of things, especially with One For All in his clutches, the guy would be unstoppable and things would go exactly as he envisions. DEKU would also make it clear that the world still has them, the heroes, which would cause Oyama to apologize, as from behind him, All For One would appear along with a brand new mask. An absolutely unsettling appearance indeed. All For One would then commend Oyama for his hard work, despite how painful it must have been for him. He did also express the fact that some of the details about his ultimate goal were incorrect, however. That being said, Oyama would soon make it clear that he had no intentions of following All For One as he shot his laser at him. It was all a ploy, and DEKU was in on it too. Yet All For One still had no idea how they managed to bypass his lie detector quirk. But it didn't matter, because even if this was a trap, One For All was right in front of him, and according to his search quirk, none of the other heroes were around, and so he would then call forth the villainous cavalry, as there seemed to be no one to stop them. That was until Monoma, using Kurogiri's Warp Gate quirk, transported all of the available heroes onto the front lines like a scene straight out of Endgame, which I'm sure Horikoshi was inspired by to some extent. With this latest chapter, we would flash back to All Might, Tsukauchi, and Principal Nezu explaining the plan to our young heroes in training. For the upteen time, it would be established that uncovering All For One's location while they were doing their searches would be next to impossible. However, this was not necessarily a bad thing, as it lined up with Eraserhead's plan rather well. In order for them to lure All For One out, they would need to give him a false sense of security. With the assumption that All For One is using his search quirk, he is likely to be monitoring their every move. And the narrative they intended to feed him was that of DEKU's exhaustion and impatience. By appearing to make one bad move after another, he would be inclined to believe everything was going according to plan. The students would then receive confirmation that Oyama was indeed on their side. However, Momo, being one of the more intelligent members of this collective, would deduce that according to the words of Oyama's father, All For One has some means of distinguishing lies from the truth. However, they had this base covered already, as according to the confession of Oyama's parents, their only means of contact with All For One is by way of audio. And it was incredibly unlikely that All For One went to the trouble of confirming every small detail with his followers before making a move, meaning it was more likely that he was able to determine the truth in real time by way of a quirk. And so if they were able to successfully deceive this quirk-based ability of his, All For One would proceed with his guard down, which would introduce another character to the equation, Shinso, who now has his very own hero costume, and it is most definitely one of the cooler ones. We already have the ninja hero Edshot, but it looks like he could end up being the shinobi hero Shinso, which does sound pretty cool. Everyone would be be happy to see him, but Sue would mention how during the joint training battle, it would be expressed that he could not make people talk with his quirk. However, on account of his impending transfer into the hero course, Shinso very much desired to keep up with his peers, which forced him to train incredibly hard, allowing him to undergo a quirk evolution after pushing his limits. By brainwashing the Oyama family, their intentions would be completely shrouded. Overall, everyone was super happy to see Shinso a part of everything, as they would question what his hero name is and beg him to join Class A. And I'm sure we're all happy to see him here. With how seriously content to the series stand to be at this stage, little moments of joy like these are such a pleasure. However, knowing the end of the series is near, I can't say I'm all too excited about this sort of future talk because it just reminds me of how much we'll never get to see. At least not with the main story, but yeah, because Shinso did not yet have his provisional license, Principal Nezu had to call in a special favor from the Chief of the Public Safety Commission, which I find to be such an odd thing. In this state of anarchy, we are still conforming to the rules of the Public Safety Commission? I get desiring a sense of order to the madness, but are we really going to simply dismiss the fact that the Public Safety Commission is just as liable for the state of the country as the villains? I must say the social commentary aspect of this series is seriously lacking for me. In one instance, it decides to point the finger at the system for its fostering of such an environment and the dismissal of those in genuine need of support and uplifting. And in the other, abides by and accepts said system on account of its resisting the result of the problem as opposed to the root. I feel as though the Public Safety Commission could have very well been its own antagonistic force if provided the due diligence, but ultimately, because of how the battle of All for One versus One for All has been poised to be the end-all be-all for the series, such things ended up being on the back burner and are more likely to be resolved by way of a block of text at the end of the series. For as much as I enjoy My Hero Academia and am fascinated by the current events, the misuse of potential like this is a painful reality to face. But I digress, I could talk about this kind of thing for hours. It would be established that having a ton of heroes lying in wait to ambush All for One wouldn't work because they would immediately know, and so the heroes would come up with a plan to where the villains couldn't possibly know. Which then brings us to arguably the most important role in this fight, a role to be possessed by Monoma, the Phantom Thief. And to fulfill it, he would need to be able to proficiently use Kurogiri's Warp Gate quirk in a matter of days. Warp Gate being a teleportation quirk, meaning it is one of the rarest quirk types out there, so this was absolutely unfamiliar territory for Monoma. As it turns out, Aizawa's voice can no longer reach Kurogiri, and it was unclear who or what he even was anymore. And to make matters worse, after having lost an eye, Eraserhead was nearly incapable of using his erasure quirk, meaning that in this next war, the one we're involved in right now, he would not be able to do anything. Monoma would reply by saying that he had heard all that Eraserhead managed to do in the first war, that without him, they would have been completely and utterly destroyed. All his life, Monoma had been told that he couldn't be a hero with a quirk like his, that it's the quirk of a side character, from which point Vlad King would hold on to him, expressing that this plan of theirs would have never been able to work without everyone's help, that there is no such thing as a side character. He never was, and he never will be, which I honestly wish was the case considering we don't get the most side character emphasis with this series, but oh well. Vlad would then tell Monoma that he is the protagonist. Now, quite a while ago with our Quirk Evolution series, which I'm sure our Plot Army veterans know plenty about, in our video for Monoma, I expressed my belief that as a professional hero, this kid could have one of the greatest hero agencies around. Selecting his sidekicks based on quirk compatibility and synergy, he could cover all his bases and really do some incredible things. So yeah, whoever told him his quirk isn't that of a superhero, they are dead wrong. In the present, tons of heroes were flooding out of the portals created by the maniacal Monoma, and somewhat surprisingly, despite the dirt thrown on Endeavor's name, all three of his main sidekicks were present here. And good lord, does Miruko's prosthetic arm look cool. Now this is a support item. I am so hyped to see her fight again. Shigaraku would be one of the many villains to emerge, and he was truly a mess here, a very strange creature indeed. He'd call out to DABI, but DABI would respond to his leader by telling him not to lead him, that he would do as he pleases, from which point he would be so delighted to see his father Endeavor, who he'd been itching to punish for months now, wondering if he should begin by cremating his dad's allies in front of him as he would launch a massive fiery attack, which would be intercepted by an equally strong eruption of ice. To emerge from another warp gate would be several shards of ice, followed by Shoto and many of the other members of Class 1A, as he refused to let his elder brother Toya do as he pleased. a sentiment which would be met by DABI's enthusiasm as he would call out to Shoto in the very same fashion that Endeavor does. All for One would then regard these forces to be insects crawling around, just as All Might would call out for the engagement of the Troy system, as suddenly to emerge from the ground beneath them would be a series of cages to encase everyone. A transgression would surprise All for One, considering they'd be able to break free of such restraints in only a matter of seconds. But soon he would realize All Might's true play here, at which point All Might and True Man would hype one another up. That this time things would be different. This time they would win and finally put an end to All for One. As suddenly Monoma would open warp gates of even more staggering sizes and begin to transport the various cages to different locations, effectively splitting up the villains, leaving us with the question of whether or not they succeeded in doing so. Now, for Monoma to have mastered this ever complicated quirk in only a week's time, I must say he is a very special talent indeed. Like, genuinely, he is a prodigy among prodigies. More than Bakugo, more than Shoto, more than Deku. Monoma stands right now have bragging rights for life. And yeah, the arrogance of All for One is being used against him to the utmost right now. My only hope is that his brilliance doesn't end up being discounted in the times to come for the sake of the heroes managing to win, as so frequently is the case for a number of series. From this point onwards, we are likely to see a number of individual battles to close things out, and hopefully you'll be willing to join us for the entire ride by subscribing to Plot Armor with notifications on. If you love these sorts of superhero stories, you'll be happy to know that we have a brand new channel by the name of Plot Armor Comics, where we aim to provide the very best Western comic content possible. But when it comes to bringing some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.